Do you have an action camera or 360 camera? Do you know there are many different filters available to your camera? Most people buy action cameras and 360 cameras and never use filters at all. I was one of them. But with so many filters available, I've always been curious whether they actually make a difference. Do we really need filters for our little cameras? What do these filters actually do? And most importantly, are they just gimmicks or are they worth spending money on? The goal of this video is simple. I want to test some of the most popular filters for action camera and 360 camera and share with you what these filters do and whether I found they are actually useful or not. And I will also share with you some of my real-world examples. Freewell is one of the companies that specialize in making filters for action cameras and 360 cameras. So I reached out to them and asked if they could send me some of their filters for testing. But this is not a sponsored video. They didn't pay me any money and they have no control over what I'm going to say. In fact, I will share with you some of the issues and downsides I noticed during testing. And I will also tell you the filter I don't think are really worth spending money on. So with that said, let's get started. The first filter I want to talk about is one that I use a lot on my mirrorless cameras, and that's the neutral density filter, or people usually just call it ND filter. An ND filter is basically like sunglasses for your camera. It reduces the amount of light hitting the sensor. So you may ask, why would we want to do that? There are a few reasons, but let's start with videography. When shooting video, there is one very important guideline that most filmmakers follow to get natural looking motion. This is the 180-degree shutter rule. What this means is simple. You set your shutter speed to roughly double your frame rate. So for example, if you are shooting 30 frames per second video, your shutter speed will be 1/60th second. If you are shooting 120 frames per second, your shutter speed will be 1/240th second. You don't have to follow this rule all the time, but in most cases, it gives you motion blur that looks natural and therefore pleasing to our eyes. Here's an example shot using my action camera, DJI Osmo Action 6. All these 3 video clips were shot at 4K 30 frames per second, but with different shutter speed. The left one is 360-degree shutter, or 1/30th second shutter speed. The middle one is 180-degree shutter, or 1/60 second. The right one is 45-degree shutter, or 1/240th second. At first glance, the difference might not be obvious. And that's exactly what I thought when I first learned about this rule. If the scene is relatively static, they can look very similar. But once there's motion, either of the subject or the camera itself, you will start to notice difference if you look at the motion blur. If I pause the footage here, you should be able to see the difference quite clearly. The 360-degree shutter has a lot of motion blur. The 180-degree shutter has less motion blur. The 45-degree shutter has very little motion blur. The 180-degree shutter is the closest to how motion looks in real life, which is why it generally looks the most natural. To get that natural motion blur, we adjust shutter speed. But here's the problem. For mirrorless cameras, when we adjust shutter speed, we also adjust the aperture as a counterbalance to control exposure. However, most action cameras and 360 cameras have a fixed aperture, so we don't have that counterbalance. The DJI Osmo Action 6 I use in this video is actually the only action cameras with an adjustable aperture right now. But even then, the aperture adjustment is very limited. So what it means is you will overexpose very easily once you try to slow down the shutter speed to shoot at a 180-degree shutter. So this is where ND filters come in. By putting a dark ND filter in front of the lens, you reduce the amount of light entering the camera, allowing you to shoot at a slower shutter speed. There are 2 different types of ND filters. Fixed ND filters, which have a set strength. Variable ND filters, which you can adjust how dark they are. Variable ND filters are more flexible, but they also have downsides. They are larger, more expensive, image quality is usually slightly worse since they are made by stacking two polarizing glasses. And if you push too far, you can get an ugly X pattern. Because of size and design limitations, variable ND filters are less common on action cameras and never exist on 360 cameras. So we are only going to look at the fixed ND filters in this video. Fixed ND filters come in different strengths. The most common ones are ND8, ND16, ND32, and ND64. The number tells you how much light is reduced. ND8 reduces light by 8 times, ND16 by 16 times, etc. On a bright sunny day, you will usually need a darker filter like ND32 or ND64. In lower light, ND8 or ND16 is often enough. Using a filter that's too dark would force you to raise ISO, which hurts image quality. That's why ND filters are often sold as a set. The Freewell ND filter I'm using includes ND8, ND16, ND32, and ND64, giving you flexibility for different lighting conditions. Freewell also has a ND1000, which is much darker and mainly used for photos. I'll come back to the ND1000 in a moment. Another benefit of controlling shutter speed when shooting video is reducing flicker from artificial lights such as fluorescent lights, LEDs, or TV screens when you shoot at fast shutter speed. Look at this example I shot with my DJI Osmo Nano when I was in Japan recently, and you can see the flickering. One way to avoid this is to match your shutter speed to the AC power frequency. Here in New Zealand, power is 50 Hz, so shooting at 1/50 second or 1/100 second helps avoid flicker. If you shoot at faster shutter speed, like this example, shooting at 1/400 second, and you can see the light flickering badly. By slowing the shutter speed down to 1/50 second, the flicker disappears. But now the scene is overexposed. Adding an ND8 filter fixes that problem, so we get proper exposure with no flicker. ND filter can also help create a stronger sense of speed when the camera is moving. Here's an example shot with the Action 6 mounted on the roof of my car, traveling at about 50 km per hour. Without any ND filter, the slowest shutter speed I can shoot at was 1/800 second. With an ND16 filter, I can slow down the shutter speed to 1/50 second. If you look at the center of the frame, the footage of both videos looks very similar. But if you look at the edges, the clip shot with the ND filter has noticeable motion blur, which makes the movement feel faster and more dynamic. You can simulate the slow shutter speed effect in editing software, but it takes extra time and it doesn't always look perfect. But even if you can get it to look perfect by software, I would still prefer to get things done right in camera when possible. One important thing to keep in mind is that action cameras and 360 cameras rely heavily on electronic stabilization. If the camera is moving and your shutter speed is too slow, individual frames can become blurry. Electronic stabilization can smooth out motion between frames, but it cannot fix blur within a frame. So this can result in a footage that looks stable overall, but with occasional blurry frames. You may notice that with my previous 1/50 second shutter speed video, and this is even more noticeable when shooting at night. Because of this, when you are hand-holding the camera, I often shoot at faster than 180 degree shutter, such as 90 degree or even 45 degree shutter. Now the downside is the motion blur may not look quite as natural and you may have flickering issue. But with action or 360 cameras, usually it is the better choice. For photos, we usually use ND filters to shoot long exposure photo. This lets you capture light trail, motion blur, smooth water, cloud movement, and other movement. To get some of these effects during the day, you need some really dark ND filters. Even ND64 may not be enough sometimes. That's where ND1000 filter comes in. ND1000 reduces light by 1000 times, allowing shutter speed of several seconds even in daylight. These are a set of photos I shot with no filter, then with ND8, ND16, ND32, ND64, and finally ND1000. You can see the difference in motion blur and how the water looks. One thing to remember, action cameras and 360 cameras have no stabilization for photos. Electronic stabilization doesn't work when you take photos. If you want to shoot long exposure photos with ND filter, you will need a tripod or something solid to keep the camera still. Okay, now let's talk about the actual ND filters from Freewell, starting with the one for the DJI Osmo Action 6. The ND filter comes as a 4-pack. I like the small plastic container for the 4-pack ND filters, very compact and easy to carry. Compared to DJI's official ND filter set, which only includes ND8, ND16 and ND32, Freewell gives you the extra ND64 and at a lower price. So it seems like the Freewell offers great value for money, assuming the image quality and everything else is good, which we will look at very soon. Depending on the action camera, filters usually attach in one of the two ways. You remove the original lens protector from the camera and screw on the filter, or you clip the filter onto the existing lens protector. For the DJI Osmo Action 6, Freewell uses a clip-on design just like the original filter from DJI. The biggest advantage of this design is convenience. Installation and removal are quick. You don't need to remove the original protector and you don't lose weather protection. The filter has a metal frame that feels well made. The filter attaches to the camera by friction only. I was a bit worried it may be a bit loose, but it's actually pretty secure. This is important because action cameras are often used in situations with lots of movement and vibration. But there are also some drawbacks. The biggest is that the filter is designed specifically for a particular camera, the Osmo Action 6 in this case. So unless DJI keeps the exact same design when they release their future model, you likely need to buy new filters again when you upgrade your action camera. Unlike filters for mirrors or DSLR cameras, filters for action cameras don't have front filter thread, so they are not stackable. It means you cannot stack ND filters together. You also cannot stack ND filter with other types of filter. To be fair, this applies not just to Freewell, but to all the action camera filters from other brands as well. Now, even if stacking were possible, the extremely wide-angle lens would cause severe vignetting, so it wouldn't be practical anyway. If you want combined effects, Freewell does offer ND plus polarizing combo filters, but there isn't a ND plus mist or other combo options. ND filters would quite often introduce color casts, especially for the darker ND filters. So I tested these Freewell ND filters using the same light source and the same white balance setting, with and without ND filters. Even when I compare the results side by side, I don't see any obvious color casts with any of the ND filters, including with the ND1000, which is very good news. One thing to note is that with the ND1000, the camera's metering often won't be accurate because the filter is just very dark, so you'll need to calculate exposure and set it manually. Luckily, because it is ND1000, so calculation is relatively easy. For example, if your shutter speed without ND1000 is 1/1000 second, with the ND1000, if you keep the same ISO, the shutter speed would be 1000 times slower, so it becomes 1 second. In my testing, the Freewell ND1000 appears to be a bit darker than the number suggests. It needed about 2/3 stop more exposure than expected. So in the previous example, it's more like 1.7 second shutter speed. I also noticed ND16 needed about 1/3 stop more exposure, but ND8, ND32 and ND64 were very accurate. So keep that in mind and make some adjustment if you buy this Freewell ND filter, or at least check if your ND filter are the same. There is only minor additional lens flare with the ND filter installed, and I didn't notice any meaningful drop in image quality. Okay, now let's talk about the ND filter for the 360 camera, Osmo 360, because there are two cameras each covering over 180 degrees with curved lenses. The ND filters also have to be curved, making them much harder to design and manufacture. That's why there are fewer ND filters for 360 cameras on the market. And that's also why they are not cheap. The Freewell ND filters for Osmo 360 costs $70 per set, and you can choose between ND16, ND32 and ND64. Keep in mind this price is per set, not for all three. If you want to buy all three, it will cost you around $200. Each set includes two filters, one for each lens on the 360 camera, and they come in a thick transparent case. The case is small, but it's square box shape instead of the normal slim case design. So if you are carrying multiple sets, they will take up a bit of space in your camera bag. The filters have a very shiny reflective coating. They look cool, but they also attract attention once mounted on the camera. Installation is a bit more involved. You need to first align the bottom of the filter, and then you press the top until it clicks into place. It takes a bit of practice, but once you get used to it, it's quite straightforward. Removing the filter is very easy. One thing you really need to watch out is fingerprints and dust during installation. A microfiber cloth is essential. Thankfully, Freewell includes a small one with each set of filters. I was initially worried about the thin attachment clips, but after using them for a while, they feel sturdy enough for normal use. I'm now more worried about dropping the filter and scratching the surface than breaking it. There are two things that you need to be aware of. First, once the ND filters are installed, the hard semi-transparent protective cover that comes with the Osmo 360 no longer fits. You have to use the soft case instead, which isn't ideal in my opinion because the Osmo 360's lenses are not user replaceable. Second, you need to turn on the transparent lens protector setting in the Osmo 360's setup screen. This helps improve stitching between the front and rear cameras. If you don't enable it, the stitching between the front and rear camera will look quite bad. Even with it turned on, it's still not perfect. But unless you're right on the stitching line, the artifacts are not too noticeable. This is a general limitation of 360 cameras when adding filters, not something specific to Freewell. Color cast is a bit more noticeable this time. When shooting under controlled environment, you can see small but noticeable difference in terms of colors. For real-world shooting, this usually isn't a big issue, but for studio work or mixing footage from different ND filters, you may need to do some color correction. Lens flare is a bit more complicated. Yes, I noticed there is more lens flare with the ND filter installed. But I said it is complicated because while I found the filter itself doesn't really introduce too much extra lens flare, with 360 cameras, it is critical to keep the camera lens super clean. So now with the ND filter installed, you need to make sure the camera lens is clean, but also both sides of the ND filter are clean. If any of the free surface isn't clean, you will notice a lot more lens flare when there is a strong light. Keeping everything perfectly clean is easier said than done because of the curved surface and that you have to push the two filters onto the camera when installing it. But other than that, I don't notice any drop in sharpness or other image quality degradation caused by these ND filters. These ND filters are the only 360 camera filters I tested in this video. The other filters I'm going to talk about are all for the action camera. So if you are only interested in 360 cameras, you can stop here. But if you are not in a hurry, I do think it's good to keep watching and learn a bit more about other filters. A circular polarizer, or CPL, is a very interesting filter and one of the most fundamental accessories you can have in your camera bag. For many photographers, this is the first filter they ever buy. Basically, a CPL filter blocks certain directions of reflected light. And when you rotate the filter, it can dramatically change how your image looks. The easiest way to explain this is to actually show you. In this example, look at three areas: the sky, the water puddle on the ground, and the glass window on the left. I have a CPL filter attached to the lens, and as I rotate it, the brightness and saturation of the blue sky change. The water puddle goes from highly reflective to almost see-through, and the reflections in the glass window also changes. So this is what makes CPL filters feel almost magical. They can dramatically change the look of an image, especially for landscape photography. But they are also very useful for many other types of shooting. One very important thing to understand is that a CPL filter doesn't work the same way in every situation. The effect is strongest when the main light source, usually the sun, is about 90 degrees to the side of the camera. If the light is straight in front of the camera, or very diffuse, like on a cloudy day, the effect of a CPL filter will be much weaker, sometimes barely noticeable. If you look at a CPL filter, you'll notice it's dark. So just like the ND filter, CPL also reduces the amount of light reaching the sensor. Because of that, you shouldn't just leave a CPL filter on the camera all the time when you don't need it. That said, if you need to reduce light slightly and don't have an ND filter with you, a CPL filter can sometimes work as a workaround. Just keep in mind, it's not nearly as strong as most ND filters. The Freewell CPL filter for the Osmo Action 6 uses the same clip-on design. It's quick and easy to install. The filter rotates smoothly. I didn't notice any obvious color shift or image degradation. Aside from the fact that it's not stackable just like the other filters, there isn't much to complain about. One thing to be careful with, especially when you're shooting video, is rotating the filter. Because action cameras have such a wide angle lens, it's very easy for your fingers to end up in the shot while you are rotating the CPL. One small detail I like is that the case has a label clearly marking it as a CPL filter. If you own multiple filters, this makes it much easier to tell them apart, especially since apart from the ND set, all the other filter cases are the same. The next filter I want to talk about is a lot more niche. In fact, it's something that many photographers may have never used before. It's the light pollution reduction filter. So what does it actually do? This filter is designed to reduce specific focal length of artificial light, mainly yellow and orange light, the kind that comes from street lights, buildings, and in general, city lighting. Let's look at an example to see the effect. With the light pollution reduction filter applied, the image becomes slightly darker overall, but notice that the yellow and orange colors are reduced much more than the other colors. Now imagine you're shooting the night sky near a city where there's a lot of artificial light spilling into the sky. That yellow glow can easily wash out stars and make the sky look muddy. This filter helps cut down that light pollution, allowing you to capture a cleaner night sky with stars and even the Milky Way standing out more clearly. One thing you may also notice is that the overall color shifts a bit when using this filter. The image looks slightly cooler and a little bit more red. Because of that, you usually want to adjust the white balance a little bit to compensate that, either in camera or by shooting in RAW and correcting it later during editing. Okay, now next, this is something that has become super popular in the last few years, and it is the mist filter. There are many different types of mist filters: black mist, pro mist, diffusion glow, and so on. Each one looks slightly different, but they all do the same basic thing. Mist filters are a type of diffusion filter. Digital camera with modern lenses quite often render everything too sharp, too perfect, and look too digital. Mist filter has a lot of tiny particles in the glass that diffuse the image a bit, and as a result, the image look more organic. Let's look at this example. With the mist filter, the image is slightly softer, highlights start to bloom, and the contrast is reduced a little. If you look at the shadow areas, you see a bit more detail in the shot with the mist filter installed. If you have followed my channel for a while, you know I really like shooting with mist filters. I use them a lot because they add that cinematic feel to both photos and videos. For example, in my recent Japan travel video, most of the footage was shot with my Fuji X-M5 and a mist filter installed on the lens. Oh, please check out that video if you haven't already. It is one of my first attempts to create a short cinematic style film, and I'm really happy with the results. Now, unlike the other filters we talked about earlier, like the ND or the CPL filter, mist filters don't really darken the scene, at least nothing noticeable. The mist effect is most obvious when there's a strong light source or bright highlights in the scene. If the scene is already low contrast and doesn't have strong highlights, the effect will be much more subtle. The image may only be a little bit softer. Just like ND filters, mist filters also comes in different strengths. 1/8 mist filter is a weak mist filter, gives you a very subtle diffused look. Quarter is a bit stronger. Half is much stronger and can make the image look quite soft with strong bloom effect. Freewell offers a quarter diffusion glow mist filter for many action cameras, and I really like the results, especially for night scenes. Personally, I really like the 1/4 strength as it gives me noticeable but not over the top results. With the right lighting, it adds a really nice, almost magical cinematic look to the image. That said, while I think 1/4 is a great all-round strength, I'd love to see Freewell release a 1/8 diffusion glow mist filter as well. There are definitely times when I want something just a bit more subtle. Okay, so what are my thoughts after testing all these different action camera and 360 camera filters? And what would I actually recommend? First of all, I'm very impressed by how easy it is to install the Freewell filters on DJI Action 6. The clip-on design is super quick and convenient, and once installed, the filters stayed very securely on the camera. The overall quality of the Freewell Action 6 filters is also very decent. Both the build quality and image quality meet my expectations. Now, while I understand why these filters are not stackable, and this is a limitation across pretty much all action camera filters, not just Freewell, it does limit how flexible the filters can be. For example, with mirrorless cameras, I can stack an ND16 with an ND64 to effectively get an ND1000 filter. Unfortunately, that's just not possible with action camera filters. The Freewell ND filters for 360 cameras are quite interesting. I've shot a lot of 360 footage in the past that I end up not using because of the very distracting flickering. And these ND filters solve that problem for me. There is a bit more color cast than I expected, but the biggest issue or challenge is actually keeping the filter surface perfectly clean. If there's dust or oil on the filter, you can get noticeable lens flare when shooting into the sun or any strong light source. I really wish Freewell would come up with some sort of tool or holder that allow us to install and remove these ND filters without touching the filter directly. The price of these filters is also not exactly cheap, but I can understand making this curved 360 filters must be a lot more expensive than the normal flat filters, and there are also 2 filters per set, which effectively double the cost as well. So which filters would I recommend? First of all, if you are a complete beginner, don't expect buying filters can instantly improve your photos or videos. No single piece of camera gear can do that, and filters are no exception. Filters can enhance your image, but only if you understand when and how to use them. I've covered some of the basics in this video, but you still need to spend time experimenting and learning. If you use filters incorrectly, they can actually make your images worse, so keep that in mind. If you are mainly a photographer, the CPL filter is the one that I recommend the most. It's essential for landscape photography, but I myself also use CPL filters a lot when shooting portraits, when I need to shoot through windows, and many other situations. If you shoot video, then ND filters are essential if you wanted that natural looking motion and wanted to avoid flickering caused by lights or screens. I think the 4-pack action camera ND filter set is very reasonably priced. If you only shoot video, don't worry about the ND1000. That one is far too dark for video, and it is only really useful for long exposure photos. For the Osmo 360, the ND filters are great too. Unfortunately, they are much more expensive. Ideally, you want all 3, but the total cost is almost half the price of the camera itself. So if you can only afford one, I would suggest ND32 if you mostly shoot on bright sunny days, or the ND16 if you shoot in a wider variety of lighting conditions. Like I mentioned before, I really like the mist filters because I enjoy the softer look they give. Images from action cameras often look a bit over-sharpened and overly digital. A mist filter helps tone that down and make the image feel more organic or film-like. That said, this is very subjective. Only consider a mist filter if you actually like that softer look. As for the light pollution reduction filter, I don't really recommend it, unless you specifically enjoy shooting astrophotography. I just feel the use case is quite limited, especially these days. Most cities switch to the more blue-white LED light, which the light pollution reduction filter doesn't help. So for most people, I don't think it's worth the money. So these are my thoughts on all these filters. I hope you found this video useful, and if you're interested in buying any of these filters, I have a link in the video description below that you can use to help this channel. And if you have any experience or thoughts about using filters with action cameras or 360 cameras, feel free to share them in the comments.